Some hope makes no sound at all. It just wags through the silence. When I first saw that little black puppy pressed against the chain link fence at the front of our North Carolina shelter, she wasn't barking or jumping like the others, just standing there with her tail going so hard it rattled the metal, watching each person who passed like they might be the one who finally saw her back. I was doing kennel checks that afternoon, the kind of routine walkthrough where you're supposed to note food levels and behavioral flags, not fall in love. The shelter felt louder than usual that day. Pit bulls throwing themselves against gates, hound mixes howling in harmony, the constant metallic clang of paws on wire. You'd think a place that noisy would make every animal visible, but that's the lie chaos tells you. Some souls get lost in all that sound. I only really noticed her because of the way she moved, or didn't move. While every other dog in that row was pacing, spinning, or lunging for attention, she just stood perfectly still at the front of her kennel, head tilted slightly, eyes locked on the main entrance like someone had promised to come back, and she fully intended to be there when they did. No barking, no whining, no sound at all. At first, I thought maybe she was just one of those naturally calm puppies, the kind that make you wonder if they've got old soul energy or just came pre-trained. But as I got closer, something about the way she held herself made my chest tighten. Her tail never stopped wagging, this wild, desperate metronome that seemed to run on pure faith, but her body stayed rooted, like she'd learned that moving forward only led to disappointment. She looked like someone had sculpted devotion out of black fur and bright eyes, then forgotten her in a corner of the world where hope goes to wait. I stopped in front of her kennel and crouched down, letting my keys jangle against the concrete floor. Most dogs react instantly, ears up, heads cocked, some kind of acknowledgement that the world just made a noise worth noticing. She didn't flinch, didn't turn her head, didn't even blink. She just kept wagging, eyes searching my face like sound had nothing to do with connection at all. That's when I knew. I stood there for a long moment with my hand on the gate latch, listening to the symphony of barking echo off the cinder block walls while this puppy stood in the center of her own silence, tail still going, mouth open in what looked like a smile but felt more like a question. "Are you the one?" The intake sheet clipped to her kennel was already worn at the edges from too many hands flipping through it. Surrender date, 90 days ago. Age, approximately 4 months at intake. Breed, mixed, probably shepherd or lab. Medical notes, puppy is deaf. No response to auditory stimuli. Requires visual communication and patient adopter. Special needs placement. 90 days. That number sat heavy in my stomach like a stone. In shelter time, 90 days might as well be 90 years. Puppies usually go fast, scooped up in the first week by families who want something small and moldable and easy. But special needs changes the math. It turns adorable into complicated. It turns yes into maybe next time. I pulled my phone out and snapped a photo through the chain link, watching as she pressed her nose forward, tail wagging so hard her whole back end swayed. Then I texted Cassandra Baldwin, our longest-running volunteer and the closest thing this place had to a den mother. "How long has this black puppy been in Kennel 7? Her response came fast. "Since June. Name's Echo. Nobody wants her." I stared at that text for longer than I should have, then looked back at the puppy, at Echo, still standing there, still wagging, still waiting like the world owed her nothing, and she planned to forgive it anyway. "Hey, Echo," I said out loud, testing the name, watching to see if she'd react. She didn't, but her tail sped up just a fraction, like maybe she'd felt the shape of my attention even if she couldn't hear the sound of her own name. I opened the gate slowly, letting it creak on its hinges. Any other dog would have bolted forward or scrambled back, but Echo just stood there, weight shifting slightly from paw to paw, eyes glued to my face like I was the most important thing she'd seen all day. I knelt down and held out my hand, palm up, and waited. She took one step forward, then another. Then she pressed her whole body against my legs and leaned in like she'd been saving that moment for someone who'd finally stay long enough to receive it. Her fur was soft but thin, ribs too easy to feel beneath my fingers, her frame smaller than it should have been for a pup her age. She wasn't starved, just overlooked. The kind of slow fade that happens when no one picks you first, second, or at all. I ran my hand down her back and felt her tail hammering against my arm, that relentless, silent drumbeat of hope that somehow hadn't quit, despite 3 solid months of people walking past. I stayed there on my knees, longer than kennel checks usually allow, watching the way she watched me, unblinking, unguarded, like she'd already decided I was safe and was just waiting for me to catch up. "You've been here the whole time, haven't you?" I whispered, not expecting an answer, not needing one. She nudged her nose into my palm and exhaled, a soft, warm breath that I felt more than heard. That's when Cassandra appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't fall in love with that one. She breaks hearts for a living." I looked down at Echo, still pressed against me, still wagging, and felt something shift in my chest that I knew I wouldn't be able to shift back. "Too late," I said. Cassandra sighed, walked over, and crouched down beside me. Echo's tail went into overdrive, body wiggling between us like she'd just won some kind of lottery she didn't know she'd entered. Cassandra reached out and scratched behind Echo's ear, her expression softening in that way it does when you've been trying not to care and failed anyway. 90 days, she said, voice tight. 90 days of watching people smile at her, wave at her, clap their hands, snap their fingers, and then keep walking when they realize she can't hear them. 90 days of her standing at this fence like someone made her a promise and she's too loyal to stop believing it. Echo tilted her head, eyes moving between us, tail never slowing. "Who surrendered her?" I asked. "Family that didn't want to deal with the extra work. Brought her in at 8 weeks old, said they didn't realize she was deaf until they got her home. Didn't even give her a name." Cassandra's jaw tightened. "So we called her Echo. Figured if she couldn't hear us, we'd at least give her a name that meant something." I felt my throat close up. Has anyone even applied? No. That single word hung in the air between us, heavier than all the noise around it. I looked at Echo, at this puppy who'd spent a quarter of her young life waiting in a 6x8 kennel, wagging at strangers who treated her silence like a flaw instead of just a different way of being, and something in me made a decision my brain hadn't fully caught up to yet. "I'm putting her in the front office rotation," I said. "If people aren't coming to her, we're bringing her to them." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "You really think that'll change anything? I think she deserves more than waiting in the back where no one really sees her." Echo leaned harder into my leg, like she could feel the weight of the words even if she couldn't hear them. Cassandra stood up, brushed the fur off her jeans, and gave me a look that was half warning, half permission. Just don't be surprised when it still breaks your heart. Some hope makes no sound at all. It just wags through the silence. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. Cassandra Baldwin had been volunteering at the shelter long enough to recognize the difference between a dog who'd given up and a dog who'd simply learned a different way to hope. Echo was the latter. It took Cassandra 3 days to figure out why. The first morning, Echo moved into the front office rotation. Cassandra arrived at 6:30 with her usual thermos of coffee and a pocket full of training treats. The shelter was still quiet, that brief window before feeding time when the air felt almost peaceful, before 100 voices rose up demanding breakfast, attention, freedom. She found Echo already awake in her temporary crate near the reception desk, sitting upright, eyes tracking the movement of early morning light across the linoleum floor. Most dogs would have started whining or pawing at the gate the moment they heard footsteps. Echo just watched, tail beginning its slow, steady rhythm the instant Cassandra came into view. "Morning, sweet girl," Cassandra said softly, kneeling down to unlatch the crate. Echo's tail sped up, but she didn't rush forward. She waited, polite, patient, like she'd been taught that space had to be offered, not taken. Cassandra clipped a leash to her collar and led her outside to the small yard behind the building, where the grass was patchy and the fence needed paint, but the morning air smelled clean. She unclipped the leash and pulled a tennis ball from her jacket pocket, winding up for a throw. "Ready?" she called out. Echo sat perfectly still, eyes on Cassandra's face, not the ball. Cassandra threw it anyway, watching as it bounced twice and rolled to a stop near the far fence. Echo didn't move. "Go get it, baby," Cassandra said, pointing. Still nothing. Cassandra walked over, picked up the ball, and waved it in front of Echo's face. Instantly, the puppy's whole body lit up, tail wagging, mouth opening, eyes bright. Cassandra threw it again, this time making sure Echo was watching the motion of her arm. Echo took off like a shot. She brought the ball back, dropped it at Cassandra's feet, and sat down, eyes locked upward, waiting for the next throw, the next signal, the next moment of visible connection. That's when it clicked. Cassandra crouched down and clapped her hands together sharply, 3 times, right beside Echo's ear. Nothing. She jangled her keys. Nothing. She dropped the tennis ball on the concrete with a loud smack. Echo's eyes never left Cassandra's face. She didn't flinch, didn't turn toward the sound, didn't react to anything she couldn't see. Cassandra sat back on her heels, the realization settling over her like a blanket she should have noticed hours ago. "You can't hear me at all, can you?" Echo tilted her head, tail still wagging, waiting for the next cue. By mid-morning, the shelter had filled with its usual chaos. Phones ringing, dogs barking, volunteers coming and going with leashes and clipboards. Cassandra brought Echo into the main kennels to observe her around the noise. A metal food bowl clattered to the floor 3 feet away. Echo didn't flinch. A door slammed shut down the hallway. Echo kept walking, nose to the ground, tail relaxed. A beagle mix in the next kennel over started howling, a sound so piercing it made Cassandra's teeth ache. Echo glanced up briefly, not because she heard it, but because she felt the vibration through the concrete floor. Cassandra pulled out her phone and texted the shelter director. "I think Echo is completely deaf. Running some basic tests, but she's showing 0 auditory response." The reply came a minute later, already in her file, noted at intake. Hasn't changed her placement status. Still available, still waiting. Cassandra stared at that text, a strange anger rising in her chest. Not at the director, not even at the system, but at the word still. As if Echo's deafness was something temporary, as if waiting long enough might cure it. She knelt down and ran her hand along Echo's back. The puppy leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly, body softening in a way that made Cassandra's throat tighten. "You've been trying to tell us the whole time, haven't you?" she whispered, "and we just kept talking at you like that was going to help." That afternoon, Cassandra sat in the break room with Joan Beckham, the shelter's longest-serving staff member, reviewing Echo's intake paperwork over lukewarm coffee and vending machine crackers. The surrender form was sparse, no name given. Reason for surrender: puppy is deaf. Family unable to accommodate special needs. She was 8 weeks old, Joan said quietly, tapping the date with her finger. Barely weaned. They didn't even try. Cassandra felt something hard and hot settle behind her ribs. Did they say anything else? Joan flipped to the notes section. Just that they didn't realize until they got her home. Apparently she didn't respond when they called her, didn't come when they whistled. They thought something was wrong with her. She paused. They were right. But not the way they meant it. Cassandra looked through the window into the front office, where Echo was curled up in a donated dog bed, nose tucked under her tail, chest rising and falling in the easy rhythm of sleep. "What did we almost call her?" Cassandra asked. "Before Echo?" Joan smiled sadly. "Nothing. She didn't have a name for 2 days. We kept calling her the black puppy in Kennel 12. Then you said she reminded you of an echo, something that comes back even when no one's listening for it." Cassandra felt her eyes sting. I didn't know how right I was. Over the next 2 weeks, Cassandra made it her mission to teach Echo a language they could both understand. She started with hand signals, simple, clear gestures that Echo could see from across a room. Palm flat and facing down meant sit. A sweeping motion toward her body meant come. A closed fist held up meant wait. Echo learned faster than any dog Cassandra had ever worked with. She didn't need repetition. She didn't need treats as bribes. She just needed to see the shape of what was being asked, and she'd offer it back like she'd been waiting her whole short life for someone to finally speak her language. Visitors started noticing her more, now that she was stationed near the front desk. "Oh, she's so calm," they'd say, smiling. "Is she shy?" others would ask, waving their hands in front of her face. "She seems a little distant," one woman said, frowning slightly as Echo sat perfectly still, tail wagging, eyes bright but unseeing of sound. Cassandra corrected them every time. She's not distant. She's deaf. She's watching you because that's the only way she knows you're there. Some people nodded, smiled politely, and moved on to the next kennel. Others paused, looked at Echo more closely, and then said the thing Cassandra had started to dread. "Oh, that's so sad. I couldn't handle that." As if deafness was a tragedy instead of just a difference. As if Echo's silence made her broken instead of just quiet. On the 30th day, Cassandra sat on the floor of the front office after closing, Echo curled up in her lap, and counted the number of people who'd stopped to look at her that week. 43. The number who'd asked to meet her. 7. The number who'd filled out an application. 0. Echo shifted in her sleep, paw twitching, and Cassandra wondered what a deaf dog dreamed about. If silence felt different when you'd never known sound. If waiting felt longer when you couldn't hear time passing. She pressed her face into Echo's fur and made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "Someone's going to see you the way I do. I swear it." Echo's tail thumped once against the floor, not because she heard the words, but because she felt the weight of the embrace. And Cassandra realized, not for the first time, that love didn't need sound to be real. It just needed to be seen. Cassandra started keeping count in the margins of her daily log. Day 32, day 45, day 58. Each number felt heavier than the last, like she was marking time on a sentence no one had agreed to serve. The shelter's intake paperwork said Echo had been surrendered in early June, when the North Carolina heat was just starting to press down on everything, and the cicadas sang loud enough to drown out thought. By mid-August, those cicadas had gone quiet, and Echo was still waiting. The routine never changed. Every morning, Cassandra arrived to find Echo already awake in her crate by the front desk, sitting upright, eyes tracking the door. Every evening, she left Echo in that same crate, tail still wagging, eyes still watching, like tomorrow might finally be the day someone stayed. Joan Beckham started bringing Echo into her office during lunch breaks. "It's just easier to eat with company," she'd say, though everyone knew Joan had been eating alone at that desk for 6 years without complaint. Echo would curl up on the donated dog bed in the corner, chin resting on her paws, eyes following Joan's every movement, the way she typed, the way she answered the phone, the way she absently reached down every few minutes to scratch behind Echo's ears. "You're too good at waiting," Joan said one afternoon, more to herself than to Echo. "Makes me think you've been practicing your whole life." Echo's tail thumped twice against the floor. Joan looked down at her and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been keeping closed. The adoption inquiries came and went like the weather. Day 61. A young couple in their 20s spent 20 minutes sitting on the floor with Echo, laughing as she brought them toy after toy, her tail a blur of black fur and optimism. "She's perfect," the woman said, scratching Echo's belly. "We'll take the application home and think about it," the man added. They never came back. Day 67. A retired teacher named Margaret asked all the right questions. How much training had Echo received? What were her energy levels? Did she get along with other dogs? Cassandra answered honestly, hopefully, watching Margaret's face for any sign of decision. "I'll need to talk to my daughter," Margaret said finally. "She thinks I should get an older dog, something calmer." Echo sat at Margaret's feet, tail wagging, waiting to be chosen. She wasn't. Day 74. A family with 2 children came in asking specifically about Echo after seeing her photo on the shelter's website. The kids squealed with delight, hugging her, throwing tennis balls across the small meet-and-greet yard. Echo ran after every single throw, bringing the ball back with the same enthusiasm she'd had on the first toss, tail wagging so hard her whole body curved. The father pulled Cassandra aside. "She's wonderful," he said quietly, "but we're just not equipped for special needs. We wouldn't even know where to start." Cassandra handed him a printout she'd started keeping in her pocket. A simple guide to living with a deaf dog, complete with hand signals, training tips, and resources. "It's easier than you think," she said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "She's already trained. She just needs consistency." The father took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "She deserves someone better than us," he said. "Someone who really knows what they're doing." Cassandra watched them leave, the kids looking back through the glass door, waving at Echo one last time. Echo sat perfectly still, tail still wagging, like goodbye was just another word for see you tomorrow. Day 82. The heat broke overnight, replaced by the first cool edge of autumn. The leaves outside the shelter started turning, and Echo started sleeping a little longer in the mornings. Cassandra noticed the change but didn't think much of it. Puppies grew, routines settled, energy leveled out, but Joan noticed something else. "She's breathing heavier," Joan said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of Cassandra's makeshift office. After playing, just a little. Cassandra looked up from her computer. "Heavier how?" "Like it takes her longer to catch her breath." They both looked through the window at Echo, who was lying in her bed near the reception desk, sides rising and falling just a bit faster than usual, tongue lolling slightly to one side. "Could just be the heat," Cassandra said, though the air conditioning had been running all week. "Could be," Joan agreed. Neither of them said the other thing they were both thinking. Day 89. William Crofts, a volunteer who came in twice a week to walk the long-term residents, stopped by Cassandra's desk on his way out. "That black puppy," he said, nodding toward Echo. "The deaf one." "Echo." "Right, Echo." He adjusted his baseball cap, squinting slightly like he was trying to find the right words. "I've been watching her. Every time I come in, she's in the same spot, doing the same thing. Tail going, eyes on the door. Doesn't matter if it's been 2 days or 2 weeks since I was last here. She's still at it." Cassandra nodded. 90 days next week." William let out a low whistle. 90 days of wagging at strangers who don't wag back. He paused, looking at Echo with something close to reverence. "She waits like she understands hope better than we do." Cassandra felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back hard. "Maybe she does." After William left, Cassandra pulled out her log and wrote in the margin next to day 89, "Still waiting, still wagging, still here." That night, after the last volunteer had gone home and the shelter had settled into its evening routine of barking, whining, and restless pacing, Cassandra sat on the floor beside Echo's crate. "I don't know what else to do," she said quietly, pressing her fingers through the wire to touch Echo's nose. "I've posted you everywhere. I've told everyone who'll listen. I've explained 100 times that you're not broken, just different." Echo licked her fingers, tail wagging softly in the dim light. "But they keep walking past you like you're asking for too much." Cassandra's voice cracked. "And you're not. You're just asking to be seen." Echo pressed closer to the crate door, eyes locked on Cassandra's face, waiting, always waiting, for the moment when words turned into action and hope turned into home. Cassandra stayed there until her legs went numb, counting the days in her head and wondering how many more she'd have to count before someone finally answered the question Echo had been asking since the day she arrived. "Are you the one?" Somewhere in the back kennels, a dog howled. Echo's ears didn't flicker, but her tail never stopped moving. Day 90. The next morning, Cassandra wrote the number slowly, her hand hesitating over the page like the ink itself weighed too much. 90 days, 3 months, an entire season of waiting. She looked at Echo, who was already standing at the front of her crate, tail wagging at the promise of another day, another chance, another person who might finally stay. And Cassandra realized with a sick, sinking certainty that she'd started counting days not as a record of time passing, but as a countdown to heartbreak she couldn't prevent. They walked in on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was slanting through the front windows at just the right angle to make everything look softer than it was. Cassandra noticed them immediately, not because they looked different from other visitors, but because they moved differently. Most people who came through the shelter doors walked with purpose, scanning kennels like they were shopping, looking for something that matched a picture they already had in their heads. Mr. and Mrs. Hooper walked like they were looking for someone they hadn't met yet. The man was tall, mid-50s maybe, with graying hair and hands that looked like they'd spent years building things. The woman beside him was smaller, wearing a cardigan despite the lingering August heat, her eyes already moving past the reception desk toward the kennels in the back. "We're here to meet dogs," Mr. Hooper said simply, his voice quiet in a way that suggested he didn't need to be loud to be heard. Cassandra stood, already reaching for the clipboard with the standard meet and greet form. Any particular... Actually, Mrs. Hooper interrupted gently. We saw a photo online. A black puppy. The post said she was deaf. Cassandra's hand froze halfway to the clipboard. Echo, she said, the name coming out more like a breath than a word. Mrs. Hooper smiled. Echo, yes, we'd like to meet her, if that's all right. Cassandra led them to the front office where Echo was lying in her bed, nose tucked under her tail, drowsing in the afternoon warmth. She looked up when their shadows fell across the floor, tail immediately starting its familiar rhythm. Slow at first, then faster as she registered new people. Most visitors would have immediately started talking, high-pitched voices, baby talk, trying to coax the puppy into excitement. The Hoopers did none of that. They knelt, both of them at the same time lowering themselves to Echo's level without a word. Mr. Hooper's knees cracked slightly with the movement. Mrs. Hooper smoothed her skirt and sat back on her heels, hands resting loosely in her lap. They didn't reach for Echo, didn't call her name, didn't snap their fingers or clap or make any of the sounds people usually made when trying to connect with a dog they couldn't touch yet. They just waited, making eye contact. Echo's tail slowed, then stopped entirely. She sat up, head tilting, eyes moving from one face to the other like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering her for months. Then Mr. Hooper lifted his right hand and made a simple gesture, palm facing out, fingers together, moving slightly forward in a small wave. A sign. Hello. Echo went completely still. For a moment, Cassandra thought she'd misread the situation, that maybe this wasn't what she'd been hoping for, that maybe... Echo stood up. She took one step forward, then another. Then she closed the distance between herself and Mr. Hooper in 3 quick movements and pressed her entire body against his chest, nose tucking under his chin, tail wagging so hard her whole back end shook. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was leaning in. Mr. Hooper's arms came up slowly, wrapping around her, and Cassandra saw his shoulders shake once before he steadied himself. Mrs. Hooper reached out and placed her hand on Echo's back, fingers moving in slow, gentle strokes. Hi, sweet girl, she whispered, though she knew Echo couldn't hear her. We've been looking for you. Echo pulled back just enough to look at Mrs. Hooper's face, then pushed forward again, this time pressing her forehead directly against Mrs. Hooper's, holding it there like she was trying to transfer every ounce of hope she'd been storing up for 90 days. Cassandra pressed her hand to her mouth, tears already burning in her eyes. Joan appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, and stopped cold. She looked at Cassandra. Cassandra looked back. Neither of them said a word. They'd both seen hundreds of meet and greets. They knew the difference between people who liked a dog and people who recognized one. This was recognition. We had a cousin, Mr. Hooper said quietly, still holding Echo, still letting her lean into him like she'd been waiting her whole life to do exactly that. Deaf since birth, taught me some basic signs when I was a kid. He looked up at Cassandra. I saw the post online and thought, maybe that might matter. To her, I mean. It matters, Cassandra managed, her voice thick. Mrs. Hooper was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe her face, one hand still resting on Echo's back. We lost our dog 6 months ago, cancer. We said we'd wait a year before getting another one, but then I saw her picture and I just... She trailed off, shaking her head. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about how long she'd been waiting. 90 days, Joan said from the doorway. Today is day 90. Mr. Hooper looked at his wife. Something unspoken passed between them, the kind of conversation that happens in silence between people who've been married long enough to not need words. We'd like to apply, he said. The paperwork took 20 minutes, but it felt like seconds. Cassandra walked them through every question, every form, her hands shaking slightly as she checked boxes and made notes and margins. Joan brought Echo into the office, letting her sit between the Hoopers while they filled out the application. And Echo didn't move from that spot, didn't wander, didn't sniff around, didn't do any of the things puppies usually did when given freedom in a new space. She just sat there, pressed against Mrs. Hooper's leg, eyes tracking Mr. Hooper's hands as he wrote. We'll need to do a home visit, Cassandra said, trying to keep her voice professional, trying not to let the hope spiral out of control. And a reference check. It usually takes a few days. We understand, Mrs. Hooper said. We'll wait as long as it takes. Mr. Hooper signed the last page and looked at Cassandra. Is there anything else she needs? Medical stuff we should know about? Cassandra hesitated, glancing at Joan. We'll need to do a pre-adoption vet check, Joan said carefully. Just routine. Make sure everything's good before she goes home. Of course, Mr. Hooper said. Whatever she needs. They stayed another 30 minutes, sitting on the floor with Echo, learning the hand signals Cassandra had taught her, watching the way she responded to visual cues, to touch, to presence. When they finally stood to leave, Echo stood with them, tail wagging, eyes bright. Mrs. Hooper knelt one more time, cupping Echo's face in both hands. We're coming back for you, she said, her lips moving slowly, deliberately, like maybe Echo could read the shape of the promise even if she couldn't hear it. I swear we are. Echo licked her face. Mr. Hooper signed goodbye, and Echo's tail went wild. After they left, Cassandra and Joan stood in the empty office, looking at the completed application on the desk, at Echo sitting in her bed with her tail still wagging, at the possibility that had just walked through the door and knelt down. That's them, Joan whispered. That's her family. Cassandra nodded, unable to speak, afraid that saying it out loud might break the spell. Echo yawned, curled up in her bed, and closed her eyes, sleeping more peacefully than Cassandra had seen in weeks. Like maybe, finally, the waiting was almost over. Dr. Robert Conrad arrived at the shelter the next morning with his stethoscope already looped around his neck and a travel mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He'd been the shelter's on-call veterinarian for 8 years, long enough to recognize the difference between a routine pre-adoption check and the kind of examination that carried weight beyond paperwork. Cassandra met him at the door with Echo on a leash, the puppy's tail wagging in its usual rhythm, eyes bright despite the early hour. This is the one? Robert asked, kneeling down to let Echo sniff his hand. This is Echo, Cassandra said, and something in her voice made Robert look up. The application that good? Perfect, Joan said from behind the reception desk. Couple in their 50s. Patient, kind. He knows sign language. They knelt down to meet her, Robert. They knelt. Robert smiled, scratching behind Echo's ears. Well then, let's make sure she's good to go home. He lifted Echo onto the examination table in the small medical room at the back of the shelter, the space barely large enough for the table, a cabinet of supplies, and 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder. Echo stood perfectly still, tail wagging slightly, watching Robert's face with that intense focus. Deaf dogs learned early, reading lips, expressions, and tensions. Let's start simple, Robert said, running his hands along Echo's body, feeling for lumps, checking joints, pressing gently into her abdomen. Everything felt normal, puppy soft, healthy. Then he placed the stethoscope against her chest. His expression shifted so subtly that someone who didn't know him might have missed it, a slight tightening around his eyes. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. He moved the stethoscope to a different spot, listened, moved it again. How's her energy been? He asked, not looking up. Cassandra glanced at Joan. Normal, I think. She plays. She runs. Does she tire easily? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maybe a little, Joan said slowly. The last couple weeks she's been napping more, but we thought it was just the heat breaking or her settling into routine. Has she been breathing heavily after exercise? Cassandra felt something cold settle in her stomach. Sometimes. Yes. Robert straightened, pulling the stethoscope from his ears and draping it around his neck. His face was carefully neutral in that way medical professionals learn to master, present but unreadable. I'm hearing a murmur, he said quietly. Could be nothing. Could be structural. I'd like to run some tests. The echocardiogram took 40 minutes. Echo lay on her side on the padded table, sedated just enough to keep her still, while Robert moved the ultrasound probe across her chest, watching the screen with an intensity that made Cassandra's hands shake. Joan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft beep of the monitor and Echo's breathing. Shallow, steady, unaware that her whole future was being written in the gray and white images flickering across a screen she couldn't see. When Robert finally pulled the probe away and powered down the machine, he stood there for a long moment with his hand resting on Echo's side, feeling the rise and fall of her ribs. "Congenital heart defect," he said finally. "Patent ductus arteriosus. The vessel that's supposed to close after birth didn't. Blood's flowing the wrong direction, making her heart work harder than it should." Cassandra felt the words land like stones. "Can it be fixed?" "Surgically, yes, but it's expensive. And there's risk." He looked at them both. Without surgery, her life expectancy is limited. Maybe a year, maybe less. With surgery, she could live a relatively normal life, but there are no guarantees. "How limited?" Joan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert was quiet for a moment. "It's hard to say. Some dogs compensate for years, others decline quickly. The murmur is moderate right now, but it could worsen." "Manageable?" Cassandra pressed. "Fragile," Robert corrected gently. "She's manageable right now, but she's fragile." The debate lasted an hour. Cassandra wanted to delay the adoption. Give the Hoopers time to understand what they were taking on, and make sure they knew the full scope of what Echo would need. Joan argued the opposite, that people who knelt down and signed hello weren't the kind of people who'd walk away from a sick puppy. "We have to tell them," Cassandra insisted, "before they sign anything else, before they fall any deeper in love." "They're already in love," Joan said. "You saw them. This isn't about convenience anymore." Robert listened to both of them, then looked at Echo, who was awake now, sitting upright on the exam table, tail wagging at nothing and everything. "Call them," he said finally. "Tell them the truth. Let them decide." Mrs. Hooper answered on the second ring. Cassandra explained as gently as she could. The murmur, the tests, the diagnosis, the options. She used phrases like congenital condition and manageable with care, and we'd understand completely if you need to reconsider. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mrs. Hooper's voice came back, steady and clear. "Is she in pain right now?" "No," Cassandra said. "Not currently." "Can she still have a good life, even if it's shorter than it should be?" "With the right care, yes, but it will require—" "We're coming in," Mrs. Hooper said, cutting her off. "Right now. We'll be there in 20 minutes. They arrived in 15. Mr. Hooper walked straight to the medical room where Echo was resting, knelt down beside the table and signed hello again. Echo's tail went into overdrive, body wiggling with recognition. Mrs. Hooper stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other reaching out to stroke Echo's head. "Tell us what she needs," Mr. Hooper said, looking up at Robert. Robert walked them through it. Medications, monitoring, possible surgery down the line, emergency signs to watch for. He didn't sugarcoat any of it. The Hoopers listened to every word. When he finished, Mrs. Hooper looked at her husband. That same unspoken conversation passed between them, the kind that happened in heartbeats instead of sentences. "We're still taking her home," Mr. Hooper said. "You understand the risks?" Cassandra asked, her voice breaking slightly. "We understand that she's been waiting 90 days for someone to choose her," Mrs. Hooper said. "And we're choosing her, heart condition and all." Joan brought out the adoption contract, the official form that turned hope into commitment. Mr. Hooper signed the first page, the one that said they understood Echo's medical status, that they accepted responsibility for her care, that they promised to provide for her needs regardless of what those needs became. "We'll need to keep her overnight," Robert said, "just to monitor her after the sedation. You can pick her up first thing tomorrow morning." Mr. Hooper nodded, signing one more page before standing up. He looked at Echo, still sitting on the exam table, tail wagging, eyes trusting. "We'll be back before you wake up," he said, forming the words slowly, deliberately. "I promise." Mrs. Hooper kissed the top of Echo's head, tears sliding down her face. "You're ours now, sweet girl, no matter what." They left just as the sun was starting to set. The adoption papers signed except for the final page, the one they'd complete tomorrow when they came to take Echo home. Cassandra carried Echo back to her crate in the front office, the puppy curling up immediately, exhausted from the day's stress. "She made it," Joan whispered, standing beside her. 91 days, and she finally made it. Cassandra nodded, watching Echo's chest rise and fall, each breath a little harder than it should be, each moment a little more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "She goes home tomorrow." But something in the air felt too thin, too uncertain. Like time was running faster than any of them realized. The shelter closed at 7. Cassandra locked the front door, turned off the overhead lights, and began her usual evening routine, checking water bowls, making notes for the morning shift, saying goodnight to the dogs who pressed their noses against kennel gates as she passed. Echo's crate sat in its usual spot near the reception desk, the puppy curled up in a tight ball, nose tucked under her tail. Cassandra stopped, keys still in her hand, and watched. Most nights, Echo would already be standing by the time Cassandra got this close, tail wagging, eyes bright, ready for one last trip outside before bed. Tonight, she didn't move. "Echo?" Cassandra said softly, knowing it was useless, knowing Echo couldn't hear her name but saying it anyway because some rituals were for the living, not the deaf. She knelt down and unlatched the crate door. Echo lifted her head slowly, and even in the dim light, Cassandra could see something was wrong. The puppy's eyes were open, alert, searching, but her body stayed curled, sides rising and falling in short, shallow breaths that came too fast. "Hey, baby," Cassandra whispered, reaching in to touch Echo's side. Her fur felt damp, clinging to skin that was too warm. Echo's tail moved once, barely a wag, more like a twitch, and she tried to lift her head higher but couldn't quite manage it. Cassandra's heart dropped into her stomach. "Joan," she called out, her voice sharp enough to carry through the building. Footsteps came running from the back office. Joan appeared in the doorway, took one look at Cassandra's face, and understood immediately. "I'll call Robert," she said, already pulling out her phone. "Call the Hoopers first," Cassandra said, sliding both hands under Echo's body and lifting her out of the crate. The puppy came willingly but limply, head lolling against Cassandra's chest, breath coming in quick, fluttering gasps. Cassandra carried her to the medical room and laid her gently on the padded table, keeping one hand on Echo's side, feeling each too-fast heartbeat through her palm. Echo's eyes found Cassandra's face and stayed there, locked in that intense way deaf dogs learned, reading, trusting, holding on to the only language they had. "I'm here," Cassandra said, even though Echo couldn't hear it. "I'm right here." Joan's voice came from the hallway, tight and urgent. "Mr. Hooper, it's Joan from the shelter. You need to come now. It's Echo. She's—" A pause. "Yes. Now. Please." Cassandra heard the crack in Joan's voice and felt something inside her break in response. She pressed her forehead to Echo's, breathing in the scent of puppy shampoo and shelter disinfectant, and something else. Something fading. "Stay," she whispered. "Just stay a little longer. They're coming." Echo's tail twitched again. Her breathing slowed. Robert arrived first, 12 minutes later, his medical bag already open before he'd cleared the doorway. He moved quickly, efficiently, stethoscope to Echo's chest, thermometer, oxygen levels, his hands steady even as his jaw tightened with each measurement. "Her heart's failing," he said quietly. "The defect. It's progressing faster than I expected." "Can you stabilize her?" Cassandra asked, already knowing the answer by the way Robert wouldn't meet her eyes. "I can try," he said. "But Cassandra—" "Try," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." Robert set up a small oxygen mask, positioning it gently over Echo's nose. The puppy didn't resist, didn't pull away. She just kept her eyes on Cassandra's face, watching, waiting, like she'd been doing for 91 days. Joan stood in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. "They're 10 minutes out," she said. "He's driving." Cassandra nodded, swallowing hard against the tightness in her throat. She kept one hand on Echo's chest, counting heartbeats that were coming too fast and too weak, each one feeling more fragile than the last. "You did so good," Cassandra whispered, tears streaming down her face now, not bothering to wipe them away. "You waited so long, and you never stopped hoping. And they came, Echo. They came for you. They're coming right now." Echo blinked slowly, her breathing evening out slightly under the oxygen. For a moment, Cassandra thought maybe, but then Echo's body shuddered once, a deep tremor that ran from nose to tail, and Cassandra felt the shift. The way presence becomes absence. The way life decides it's finished. "No," Cassandra breathed. "No, not yet. Please, not yet." Robert's hand came to rest on Cassandra's shoulder. Joan made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Echo's tail moved one last time. Not a wag, just a gentle settling, like she was finally allowing herself to rest after the longest wait of her short life. Her eyes stayed open, still locked on Cassandra's face. And then the light behind them dimmed, softened, and finally went still. Cassandra didn't know how long she stood there, both hands cradling Echo's head, before she heard the front door slam open. Footsteps running. Mr. Hooper's voice, ragged and desperate. "Where is she?" Joan met him in the hallway. Cassandra heard the moment she told him, heard the sharp intake of breath, the single word no that came out more like a plea than a statement. When Mr. and Mrs. Hooper appeared in the doorway, Cassandra looked up, tears streaming, and shook her head. Mrs. Hooper's hand went to her mouth. Mr. Hooper moved forward slowly, like walking through water, and stopped at the edge of the exam table. Echo lay perfectly still, the oxygen mask now removed, her body small and quiet in that devastating way death makes everything look smaller. "We were 10 minutes away," Mr. Hooper said, his voice hollow. 10 minutes. "She waited for you," Cassandra said softly. "For 91 days, she waited. And when you came yesterday, when you knelt down and signed hello, that was her answer. You were hers before she ever left this building." Mrs. Hooper reached out with shaking hands and touched Echo's head, stroking the soft black fur one last time. "We were supposed to take her home," she whispered. "We promised." "She knew," Joan said from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "She knew she was chosen." Mr. Hooper placed both hands on the table, head bowed, shoulders shaking silently. The room filled with the weight of too late, of love that arrived exactly when it was supposed to and still couldn't change the ending. Outside, the North Carolina night pressed against the windows. Inside, a puppy who'd spent 91 days wagging at strangers finally stopped waiting. Not because she'd given up, but because she'd finally been found. Cassandra stayed until they were ready to leave, until Mrs. Hooper had pressed her forehead one last time to Echo's, until Mr. Hooper had signed goodbye to a puppy who would never see it. Robert wrapped Echo's body in a soft blanket, one of the donated ones that smelled like fabric softener and hope. And when the Hoopers finally turned to go, Mrs. Hooper stopped at the door and looked back. "We still want to sign the papers," she said quietly. Cassandra blinked. "What?" "The adoption papers. The last page." Mrs. Hooper's voice was steady despite the tears. "We want to finish them." "She's gone," Joan said gently. "But she was ours," Mr. Hooper said, turning to face them. "Even if only for a moment. And we want that to be official." So they did. At 8:47 p.m., in a shelter office that smelled like industrial cleaner and grief, Mr. and Mrs. Hooper signed the final page of Echo's adoption contract. The ink blurred slightly where Mrs. Hooper's tears fell, but every word was legible, every promise kept, even the ones made too late. He Memorial was small. Just the staff, a handful of volunteers, and the Hoopers gathered in the shelter's front office on a gray Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Echo passed. Someone had brought flowers, white roses in a mason jar, and placed them beside the empty crate that still sat near the reception desk. No one had moved it yet. No one seemed ready to. Cassandra stood near the back, arms crossed, watching as Joan carefully hung a framed photograph on the wall above where Echo used to sleep. The image was one Cassandra had taken months ago, back when she'd first started documenting Echo's wait. The black puppy standing at the chain-link fence, mouth open in a silent smile, tail caught midway in a blur of motion, eyes bright with impossible hope. Below the frame, Joan mounted a small brass plaque. It read, "She waited. She loved. She belonged." Mrs. Hooper stood closest to the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth, shoulders trembling. Mr. Hooper stood beside her, his arm around her waist, holding her steady the way he probably had 1,000 times before in their marriage. William Crofts, the volunteer who'd said Echo understood hope better than they did, cleared his throat. Should we say something? Joan nodded, wiping her eyes. I think we should. So they did. One by one, people shared their small memories. The way Echo tilted her head when you made eye contact. The way she brought toys to everyone who sat down. The way her tail never stopped moving, even when no one was watching. Cassandra stayed quiet, letting the words wash over her, each one landing like a stone in still water. When it came to her turn, she shook her head. I can't, she whispered. Joan reached over and squeezed her hand. Then Mr. Hooper stepped forward. We only knew Echo for one day, he began, his voice low and steady despite the tears on his face. One meeting, one examination, one night of believing we'd bring her home the next morning. He paused, looking at the photograph. But in that one day, she taught us something we'd forgotten. Mrs. Hooper moved closer to him, her hand finding his. She taught us that love doesn't need time to be real, he continued. That commitment isn't about how long you've known someone. It's about recognizing them when they show up. And Echo showed up for us the moment we knelt down. His voice broke slightly, and he took a breath before continuing. We can't bring her back. We can't give her the life she deserves. But we can make sure other animals like her, the ones who wait too long, the ones labeled hard to place, the ones with medical needs that make people walk away, we can make sure they don't wait alone. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Joan. We're establishing a fund, Mrs. Hooper said, her voice stronger now. For medical care, for surgeries, treatments, medications, whatever animals in this shelter need that might otherwise keep them from finding homes. Joan opened the envelope with shaking hands, looked at the check inside, and let out a small gasp. It's not enough to save everyone, Mr. Hooper said, but it's a start. We're calling it Echo's Promise, Mrs. Hooper added, because she kept her promise to wait, and we're keeping ours to make sure her story matters. The program launched 3 weeks later. The shelter's website featured Echo's photo front and center, her tail mid-wag, her eyes full of hope that had outlived her. Below it, a simple explanation. Echo's Promise provides medical care for special needs animals waiting for homes, because every animal deserves a chance to be chosen. Donations started coming in. Small amounts from people who'd never met Echo, but recognized her story in their own lives. Larger gifts from local businesses who wanted to be part of something that turned loss into action. The first animal to benefit was a 3-legged beagle named Scout, who needed hip surgery. The second was a blind cat named Pepper, who required eye removal. The third was a senior golden retriever with diabetes who needed daily insulin and monitoring. All 3 were adopted within a month of receiving treatment. Joan started teaching basic sign language during weekend adoption events. She'd gather small groups of visitors near the front desk, right beneath Echo's photograph, and walk them through simple signs. Hello, sit, come, good, I love you. You never know when you might meet a deaf dog, she'd say, demonstrating each gesture slowly, and knowing even one sign could be the difference between connection and walking away. Families practiced with each other, kids giggling as they signed to their parents, couples testing the signs on each other before trying them with the dogs. Some visitors asked why it mattered so much. Joan would point to Echo's photograph. Because she waited 91 days for someone who could speak her language, she'd say. And when they finally showed up, it was too late. We can't change what happened to her, but we can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Cassandra stopped counting days. She still kept her daily log, still made notes in the margins about each animal's behavior and needs, but the numbers stopped appearing beside their names. Day 12, day 37, day 89. Those markers had always felt like a countdown, a measurement of how long hope could survive before it started dying. But Echo had waited 91 days, and her hope never died. It just changed forms. Instead of counting, Cassandra started documenting moments. The first time a shy dog made eye contact, the moment a reactive dog accepted a treat gently, the instant a scared cat started purring. Small victories, evidence of progress that had nothing to do with how long they'd been waiting, and everything to do with who they were becoming while they waited. 6 months after Echo's death, a deaf puppy arrived at the shelter, a small brown and white terrier mix with one ear that flopped and one that stood straight up. The intake form listed her as special needs, requires experienced adopter. Joan brought her to the front office and set up a crate beside Echo's memorial. Within a week, a young couple came in specifically asking about deaf dogs. They'd seen Echo's story on the website, learned basic signs from Joan's weekend classes, and wanted to adopt an animal that needed them. They knelt down to meet the terrier. The puppy's tail started wagging. The man signed hello. The puppy froze, then leaned in. When the adoption was finalized 2 weeks later, Cassandra stood at the front desk watching the couple carry the puppy out to their car, her tail wagging the entire way. Joan came to stand beside her. Echo would have liked that, Joan said quietly. Cassandra nodded, her throat tight. She would have wagged at them. She did, Joan said, just not the way we expected. They stood there in silence, watching the car pull away, watching the puppy's head visible in the back window, watching Love finally arrive on time. On the wall above them, Echo's photograph seemed to glow slightly in the afternoon light, tail mid-wag, eyes bright, waiting for no one and everyone all at once. Below it, the plaque gleamed. She waited. She loved. She belonged. And in the margins of Cassandra's log, where numbers used to live, she wrote a single line. Some stories end in goodbye. Others teach us how to say hello better. The following weekend, someone said Echo's name out loud during an adoption event, just in passing, while explaining the memorial to a new visitor. Cassandra heard it from across the room and felt something shift in her chest. Not grief exactly. Not anymore, just recognition. That a puppy who never heard her own name had somehow made it echo louder than sound ever could. And that waiting, in the end, wasn't about time at all. It was about faith. The kind that wagged through silence and chose hope, even when hope chose heartbreak. The kind that transformed 91 days of rejection into a legacy that would outlive them all. The kind that only Echo could have taught them, because some prayers don't make a sound. They just changed the world quietly, one wag at a time. The shelter didn't look different. Same cinder block walls, same chain link kennels, same concrete floors that echoed with barking and the metallic clang of gates opening and closing. Same afternoon sunlight spilling through the front windows, same worn dog beds stacked in the corner, same smell of disinfectant and kibble and second chances. But something had shifted. It was in the way Joan greeted visitors now, not with a clipboard first, but with a question. Do you know any sign language? It was in the way William Crofts lingered longer at certain kennels, the ones holding dogs who'd been there more than a month, sitting on the concrete floor with them even when his knees protested, just to let them know someone saw them waiting. It was in the way Cassandra walked past Echo's memorial every morning and touched the frame, just briefly. Just her fingertips against the glass, like she was saying hello to someone who'd taught her a language she hadn't known she needed. The shelter had been changed by a puppy who never barked, and the change was permanent. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, almost a year after Echo passed, a family walked through the front doors with their 8-year-old daughter between them. The girl was deaf. Cassandra saw the hearing aids first, then noticed the way the parents communicated with their daughter. Hands moving in fluid, practiced signs, faces expressive, bodies attuned to a language that didn't need sound. "We're looking for a dog." The father signed and spoke simultaneously, his voice calm. "We saw on your website that you have experience with deaf animals." Joan appeared from the back office, already smiling. "We do. Would you like to meet one?" The mother glanced at her daughter, whose eyes had already found Echo's photograph on the wall. The girl walked closer, tilting her head, reading the plaque below. "What happened to her?" the girl signed. Joan knelt down, meeting the girl at eye level. "She waited a long time for a family." Joan signed back, her movements still a little clumsy but clear enough. And when they finally came, she was too sick. But she taught everyone here something important. "What?" the girl signed. "That silence isn't empty. It's just a different way of being heard." The girl nodded solemnly, like she'd known that truth her whole life and was glad someone finally said it out loud. They met 3 dogs that afternoon. The first was too energetic, bouncing off the walls of the meet and greet room. The second was sweet but reactive, barking at every sound, overwhelming in the way only hearing dogs could be. The third was a small black and tan shepherd mix named Ember, deaf since birth, surrendered at 6 months old, waiting for 63 days. When the family entered her kennel, Ember stood up slowly, tail beginning its careful wag, eyes moving from face to face. The girl knelt down first. She didn't call out, didn't clap, didn't make any of the sounds hearing kids made when meeting dogs. She just held out her hand and signed hello. Ember froze, head tilting. Then she walked forward, closed the distance, and pressed her entire body against the girl's legs. The girl's face transformed, breaking open into a smile so bright it made Cassandra's chest ache. "She's like me," the girl signed to her parents, tears already forming in her eyes. "She is," the mother signed back, her own eyes wet. The father knelt beside his daughter, one hand on Ember's head. "Should we ask if we can take her home?" The girl nodded so hard her whole body moved. The adoption process took a week. Home visit, reference checks, all the standard procedures that made sure animals went to the right places. When the family returned to finalize the paperwork, the girl brought a gift, a hand-drawn picture of Ember with a heart above her head, and the words, "She waited for me," written in careful block letters at the bottom. Joan hung it on the wall beside Echo's memorial. 2 stories, 2 deaf dogs, 2 families who knelt down. Echo would have loved this, Cassandra said, standing beside Joan, watching the girl practice signs with Ember in the front office. Sit, stay, come, or good girl. "She does love it," Joan corrected gently. "Just from somewhere we can't see." That evening, after the family had left with Ember curled up in the girl's lap in the back seat, after the shelter had emptied and the last volunteer had gone home, Cassandra sat on the floor in front of Echo's memorial. She'd done this before, dozens of times over the past year, sitting in this exact spot, looking at that photograph, trying to understand what Echo had been trying to tell them all along. Tonight, she finally understood. Waiting wasn't passive. It was the bravest kind of faith. It was standing at a fence day after day, tail wagging, eyes hopeful, believing that love was coming even when every piece of evidence suggested otherwise. It was choosing hope over bitterness. It was trusting that somewhere, someone was learning your language. It was believing you were worth finding. Echo had taught them that, not with words or barks or any sound at all, just with the relentless silent rhythm of a tail that never stopped wagging. Cassandra pulled out her phone and opened the shelter's database, scrolling through the list of animals currently in residence. 32 dogs, 14 cats, each one waiting, some for days, some for weeks, some for months, each one hoping that today might be the day someone stopped walking and finally saw them. She stood up, walked through the quiet kennels, and stopped at each gate, making eye contact, offering a hand, letting them know they were seen. A pit bull named Rosie, day 47. A hound mix named Tucker, day 62. A senior chihuahua named Peanut, day 93. At each kennel, Cassandra whispered the same thing Echo had whispered to the world without ever making a sound. "Someone's coming. I promise. Just keep wagging." Outside, the North Carolina night settled over the shelter like a blanket. Inside, the dogs quieted one by one, settling into sleep, dreaming whatever dogs dream when they're waiting for something better than what they have. And on the wall in the front office, beneath the soft glow of the exit sign, Echo's photograph hung in permanent vigil. Tail mid-wag, eyes bright, mouth open in a silent smile that had outlived her body and transformed into something bigger than one small life. A promise, a legacy, a reminder that some prayers don't make a sound, they just change the way we listen. The next morning, when Cassandra arrived at 6:30 with her thermos of coffee and her pocket full of treats, she walked past Echo's memorial and touched the frame. "Good morning, Echo," she said out loud, even though Echo couldn't hear her, even though Echo was gone. Just in case somewhere, somehow, love could hear its own name. And just in case someone else was still wagging behind a fence, waiting for the world to finally kneel down and say hello. Because some stories end in goodbye. But the best ones, the ones that matter, they teach us how to wait better, how to hope harder, how to see the silent prayers being offered all around us by those who believe in us before we believe in ourselves. Echo had waited 91 days, And in those 91 days, she'd taught an entire shelter how to love the ones everyone else walked past. That was her story. That was her promise. And it was still being kept. One wag, one sign, one adopted animal at a time. She waited. She loved. She belonged. And because of her, so would all the others. Some hope makes no sound at all. It just wags through the silence. And if you're quiet enough, if you stop walking and kneel down, you might just hear it. Echo did. And she never stopped believing someone would finally hear her back.